This is the story of Christina Formella, documented through police interviews, court filings, text message evidence, and victim testimony from March 2025 through June 2025. September 2020. Downers Grove South High School welcomed their newest special education teacher with open arms. Christina Formella, 25 years old, fresh-faced and eager, seemed like exactly what the district needed. She had her teaching license, a degree in special education, and that rare combination of patience and enthusiasm that made struggling students feel seen. Parents loved her. Students respected her. Administrators praised her dedication. What they didn't know was that they had just hired a predator. For 3 years, Formella built her reputation methodically. She volunteered for extra duties. She coached the girls' soccer team. She stayed after school to help students who were falling behind. She was the teacher parents requested for their children with learning disabilities. She was incredible with the kids. One parent would later tell investigators, "My daughter struggled in every other class, but Christina made her feel smart," the perfect cover for what was coming. By January 2023, Formella had identified her target, a 14-year-old boy in her special education program, vulnerable, struggling academically, desperate for adult approval and attention. She began the grooming process with textbook precision. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Extra attention during class, offers to help with homework after school, small compliments that made the boy feel special, text messages about school assignments that gradually became more personal. "She made me feel like I was important," the victim would later tell investigators. What seemed like a caring teacher investing in a struggling student was actually a predator systematically breaking down boundaries. The first boundary she crossed was professional. Teachers aren't supposed to text students from personal phones, but Formella convinced the boy and herself that this was different. He needed extra support. She was just being a good teacher. The second boundary was emotional. The conversation shifted from homework to personal problems. She became his confidant, his special friend, the adult who understood him when no one else did. The third boundary was physical. December 2023. After school tutoring session, just the two of them in her classroom. That's when Christina Formella committed her first sexual assault against a child. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. The December 2023 assault wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the beginning of a systematic campaign of sexual abuse that would span nearly 2 years and destroy a child's innocence forever. Court records reveal the horrifying scope of Formella's crimes. Between January 2023 and September 2024, she sexually abused her victim approximately 50 times, 45 times at school during school hours, 5 additional times at her own home. Let that sink in. A trusted educator used her position of authority to sexually assault a child 50 times while being paid by taxpayers to protect and educate him. But the frequency of the abuse is only part of the horror. The calculated nature of Formella's crimes reveals a predator who knew exactly what she was doing. She kept detailed notes about the victim in her phone's notes application. When initially questioned by police, she tried to claim these were outlets for anxiety. But when confronted with the explicit sexual content, she admitted the notes were about the victim, not her husband. She documented her crimes, she planned her assaults, she scheduled her abuse around school activities and her personal life. The text message evidence presented in court reveals the disturbing dynamic Formella created. "I love having sex with you," she wrote to a boy who had started as her 14-year-old student. The victim, groomed and manipulated, responded with detailed descriptions of their encounters. These weren't love letters between consenting adults. These were the documented communications between a sexual predator and her child victim. The abuse escalated in both frequency and boldness. What started as isolated incidents in her classroom expanded to her home. She invited a child to her house, the same house she shared with her fiancé, and sexually abused him there. The psychological manipulation was as devastating as the physical abuse. Formella convinced the victim that their relationship was special, that he was mature for his age, that what they were doing was normal and consensual. She isolated him from potential support systems. She made him feel complicit in the abuse. She used his natural adolescent confusion about sexuality to maintain control over him. "She told me I was different from other kids my age." The victim later revealed that I was more mature and could handle an adult relationship. This is classic predator behavior. Formella wasn't a confused adult making poor choices. She was a calculating abuser using sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques to maintain access to her victim. The most chilling aspect of the abuse was how Formella compartmentalized her life. During the day, she was sexually assaulting a child. In the evening, she was planning her wedding to her college sweetheart, Michael. August 2024. While actively abusing her student victim, Christina Formella walked down the aisle in a white dress and promised to love, honor, and cherish her new husband. The wedding photos show a radiant bride smiling and laughing with her new husband. What they don't show is that just hours before or after those photos were taken, she may have been planning her next assault on a child. Just when you think you've heard the worst of Christina Formella's crimes, The evidence reveals an even more disturbing truth about her capacity for deception and manipulation. While systematically abusing her student victim, Formella was simultaneously building a life with her husband, Michael. She planned a wedding, maintained friendships, and continued her teaching career, all while carrying out a nearly 2-year campaign of child sexual abuse. The psychological compartmentalization required for this level of deception is staggering. Most people struggle to maintain small lies for short periods. Formella maintained a massive deception that involved every aspect of her life for 600 days. She lied to her husband about working late when she was actually abusing her victim at school. She lied to her colleagues about her relationship with the student. She lied to administrators about her after-school activities. She lied to parents about why she was giving their children's classmates so much individual attention. But perhaps most chillingly, she lied to herself. The diary entries found on Phila's phone reveal a woman who had constructed an elaborate fantasy to justify her crimes. She didn't see herself as a predator abusing a child. In her twisted worldview, she was in a relationship with someone who understood her. When the abuse was finally discovered, Forella's first instinct wasn't remorse or accountability. It was to blame the victim. She told police that the 15-year-old boy was her stalker. She claimed he had pursued her and that she was the victim of his advances. She tried to portray a child whom she had started grooming when he was just 14 as the aggressor in his own sexual abuse. This victim-blaming strategy is common among female predators, but it's particularly insidious when the victim is a child with learning disabilities who was specifically targeted because of his vulnerability and whom she had been grooming since he was 14 years old. The evidence completely contradicted Formella's claims. Text messages showed her initiating contact. Her own notes revealed her planning and documenting the abuse. Witness testimony confirmed that she had created opportunities to be alone with the victim. But what investigators found most disturbing was how Formella had manipulated everyone around her to enable her abuse. She convinced school administrators that the victim needed extra help and that she was the best person to provide it. She arranged for private tutoring sessions that gave her unsupervised access to him. She used her reputation as a dedicated teacher to deflect any questions about the amount of time she spent with one particular student. She even manipulated her husband, Michael. When he asked about text messages from students, she explained them away as part of her job. When he noticed her working late or coming home at odd hours, she blamed it on her dedication to helping struggling students. Michael Formella told investigators he knew nothing about the victim beyond his status as a soccer player. His wife had successfully hidden a 2-year sexual relationship with a child from the person closest to her. The truth investigators uncovered next would shock the entire Downers Grove community. January 2025. A mother in Downers Grove was helping her son set up his new phone when she made a discovery that would expose one of the most disturbing teacher abuse cases in Illinois' history. While accessing her son's iCloud account to transfer data, she found text messages that made her blood run cold. Explicit conversations between her 15-year-old son and his special education teacher, Christina Formella. The messages weren't just inappropriate. They were evidence of ongoing sexual abuse. "I love having sex with you," read one message from Formella to the child. The responses revealed intimate details of their encounters both at school and at Formella's home. The mother immediately contacted police within hours. Investigators were building a case that would ultimately result in 55 felony charges against the trusted educator. But what happened next revealed the true extent of Formella's manipulation and the devastating impact of her crimes. When confronted by investigators, Formella's first response was denial, then deflection, then victim blaming. She cycled through every strategy predators use when caught, except the one that might have shown genuine remorse, accepting responsibility. She claimed the explicit text messages were taken out of context. She insisted the victim had pursued her. She even suggested that her notes about the abuse were fictional, creative writing exercises to deal with stress. Detective Sarah Martinez, who conducted the initial interview, later described Formella's demeanor as chillingly calm and calculating. There were no tears, no expressions of guilt or shame, just a methodical attempt to minimize her crimes and shift blame to a child. She showed more emotion when discussing how the investigation might affect her teaching career than when talking about the harm she had caused to the victim. Detective Martinez noted in her report, the investigation quickly expanded as detectives realized the scope of the abuse. What initially appeared to be a few inappropriate encounters was actually a systematic pattern of sexual assault spanning nearly 2 years. Search warrants for phone and computer revealed the full extent of her documentation. The Notes app entries, the diary entries blaming the victim for ruining her relationship and marriage, the detailed records of when and where the abuse occurred. But perhaps most disturbing was what investigators found about Formella's mindset during the abuse. Her diary entries revealed someone who saw herself as the victim of the situation she had created. "He ruined everything," She wrote about the boy she had been systematically abusing since he was 14. Now my marriage is destroyed and my career is over because of him. The psychological manipulation was so complete that even after being caught, Formella couldn't acknowledge that she was a predator who had targeted and abused a vulnerable child. March 16, 2025, Christina Formella was arrested at her home and charged with 3 initial felony counts of criminal sexual assault and aggravated criminal sexual abuse. But investigators were just getting started. What seemed like a straightforward case of teacher misconduct exploded into one of the most comprehensive prosecutions of a female predator in recent memory. As investigators dug deeper into Formella's crimes, the evidence painted a picture of abuse so systematic and extensive that prosecutors knew the initial charges were just the beginning. May 20, 2025, a DuPage County grand jury returned an indictment that shocked even seasoned prosecutors. 52 additional charges were added to Formella's case, bringing the total to 55 felony counts, 20 counts of criminal sexual assault, Class 1 felonies carrying potential sentences of 4 to 15 years each, 20 counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse, also Class 1 felonies, 6 counts of indecent solicitation of a child, 6 counts of grooming. If convicted on all counts, Christina Formella faced up to 60 years in prison. Prosecutor Jacqueline McAndrew didn't mince words when describing the defendant. Unbelievably conniving and unbelievably controlling. She told the court she knew what she was doing was wrong. The prosecution argued for pre-trial detention, citing concerns about Formella's proximity to the high school and the potential threat she posed to other students. They painted a picture of a predator who had successfully hidden her crimes for 2 years and couldn't be trusted not to reoffend. But Judge Mia McPherson denied the detention request, instead imposing strict conditions. GPS monitoring, surrender of passport, no contact with minors except supervised visits with family members, and no access to school property. The decision sparked outrage in the community. Parents questioned how someone facing 55 felony charges for child sexual abuse could be released back into the neighborhood where her crimes occurred. She's living 10 minutes from the school where she abused that boy. One parent told local news, "How are we supposed to feel safe sending our kids to school knowing she's out there?" The community's fears weren't unfounded. Research shows that sexual predators who target children have high recidivism rates, and Formella had demonstrated an ability to hide her crimes while maintaining positions of trust and authority. But what happened next at Formella's court appearances would generate even more controversy and viral attention. Instead of showing remorse or shame, Formella appeared at every hearing hand-in-hand with her husband, Michael. The couple's public displays of unity sparked outrage and disbelief across social media platforms. TikTok user Abby Blabby posted videos of Formella arriving at court with her husband, generating millions of views and sparking debates about spousal loyalty in criminal cases. The footage showed a woman who appeared confident and defiant rather than remorseful for her crimes against a child. Twitter personality Colin Rugg amplified the case with a viral thread. High school teacher Christina Formella, smacked with 52 additional charges, allegedly had sex with a boy at least 45 different times starting when he was just 14. The post garnered hundreds of thousands of engagements and retweets. The public reaction was swift and overwhelmingly critical. Unlike previous cases involving female teachers and male students, there was no romanticization of the relationship. The public correctly identified Formella's actions as predatory abuse of a child. But what investigators discovered about the impact on the victim would prove even more devastating than the crimes themselves. Subscribe to Women of Crime now. We expose the most disturbing female predators that mainstream media won't touch. Music behind every statistic about child sexual abuse is a human being whose life has been forever altered by the actions of a predator. In Christina Formella's case, that human being was a boy who trusted his teacher to help him learn and grow. A boy she began targeting when he was just 14 years old. Instead, she systematically destroyed his innocence and sense of safety. The victim impact statements filed in court reveal the devastating consequences of Formella's crimes. What she characterized as a relationship was experienced by the victim as confusion, shame, and trauma that will likely affect him for the rest of his life. Child psychologists who evaluated the victim described classic symptoms of sexual abuse trauma: difficulty trusting adults, problems with academic performance, social withdrawal, and struggles with understanding appropriate boundaries in relationships. The victim has expressed feelings of guilt and responsibility for the abuse, noted Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in child trauma. This is common among victims of sexual abuse, but particularly devastating when the perpetrator is someone in a position of authority and trust. The grooming process Formella used was textbook predator behavior designed to make the victim feel complicit in his own abuse. She convinced him that he was special, mature, and capable of handling an adult relationship. She made him feel chosen and important while systematically violating his boundaries and exploiting his vulnerability. The psychological impact extended beyond the direct abuse. The victim had to cope with the knowledge that his teacher, someone he trusted and looked up to, had been using him for her own sexual gratification while pretending to care about his education and well-being. Imagine being 15 years old and discovering that the adult who made you feel smart and capable was actually manipulating those feelings to abuse you since you were 14, explained Dr. Walsh. The betrayal of trust is as traumatic as the physical abuse itself. The victim's family also suffered devastating consequences. His mother blamed herself for not recognizing the signs of abuse. His father struggled with anger and feelings of helplessness. Siblings dealt with the disruption to their family and the public attention surrounding the case. "Our whole family has been destroyed by what she did," the victim's mother told investigators. "She didn't just hurt my son, she hurt all of us." The family faced the additional trauma of having their private nightmare become public. Court proceedings, media coverage, and social media discussions meant that the victim's abuse was being dissected and analyzed by strangers across the internet. But what made the situation even more painful was how Formella continued to victimize the child even after being caught. Her attempts to portray him as a stalker who had pursued her were not just legally strategic, they were psychologically abusive. She was asking the world to believe that a child with learning disabilities, whom she had started grooming at age 14, had somehow seduced and manipulated his adult teacher into a sexual relationship. This victim-blaming strategy is particularly harmful because it reinforces the shame and guilt that abuse victims already feel. It sends the message that the child was somehow responsible for his own victimization. The truth, supported by overwhelming evidence, was exactly the opposite. Formella had identified a vulnerable student when he was just 14, groomed him systematically, and exploited his trust and need for adult approval to facilitate her abuse. What drives a woman to systematically abuse a child while maintaining the facade of a caring educator and devoted wife? The Christina Formella case offers disturbing insights into the psychology of female predators that challenges common assumptions about women who commit sexual crimes. Unlike male predators who often use physical force or obvious coercion, female predators like Formella typically rely on emotional manipulation and the exploitation of caregiving relationships. They use their perceived nurturing nature as a weapon against their victims. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who has studied female sex offenders for over 20 years, explains the pattern. Female predators often target children who are emotionally vulnerable or struggling academically. They position themselves as the caring adult who understands and supports the child in ways others don't. This was exactly Formella's strategy. She identified a student with learning disabilities who was struggling in school and desperate for adult approval. She became his champion, his advocate, his special friend, all while grooming him for abuse. Starting when he was just 14 years old, the psychological profile that emerges from the evidence is chilling in its calculation. Formella wasn't acting on impulse or struggling with mental illness. She was methodically planning and executing a campaign of abuse while successfully deceiving everyone around her. Her ability to compartmentalize is particularly disturbing. She could sexually abuse a child in her classroom and then attend faculty meetings discussing student welfare. She could document her crimes in her phone while planning her wedding. She could manipulate a vulnerable teenager while presenting herself as a model educator. This level of psychological compartmentalization suggests a profound lack of empathy and a sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate others. These are not the characteristics of someone who made a mistake or fell into an inappropriate relationship. The diary entries found on Formella's phone reveal her true mindset. Even after being caught, she saw herself as the victim. She blamed the child for ruining her life and marriage. She showed no genuine remorse for the trauma she had inflicted. The most dangerous predators are often those who can maintain a positive public image while committing horrific crimes in private, notes Dr. Chen. They use their reputation and perceived trustworthiness to gain access to victims and deflect suspicion. This explains how Formella was able to abuse her victim for nearly 2 years without detection. Parents, colleagues, and administrators saw her as a dedicated teacher who went above and beyond for her students. They interpreted her extra attention to the victim as professional dedication rather than predatory grooming. The case also reveals how female predators exploit gender stereotypes to their advantage. Society is less likely to view women as potential sexual predators, which gives them cover to operate. When accusations do arise, there's often skepticism about whether a woman could really be capable of such crimes. Formella attempted to use these stereotypes in her defense, portraying herself as the victim of a teenage boy's advances. This strategy relies on the assumption that people will find it more believable that a child pursued an adult than that a trusted female educator systematically abused her student. But the evidence in Formella's case was overwhelming. The text messages, diary entries, and documented pattern of behavior left no doubt about who was the predator and who was the victim. What makes female predators like Formella particularly dangerous is their ability to hide in plain sight. They use positions of trust and authority to gain access to victims, and they exploit societal assumptions about women and caregiving to avoid detection. The revelation that Christina Formella had been systematically abusing a student for nearly 2 years sent shock waves through the Downers Grove community that extended far beyond the immediate victim and his family. Parents who had entrusted their children to Formella's care were forced to confront a terrifying reality. The teacher they had praised and recommended had been a predator hiding in plain sight. "I recommended her to other parents," said Jennifer Morrison, whose daughter they had been in Formella's special education program. "I told them how wonderful she was with struggling kids. Now I wonder what I missed. What signs were there that I didn't see?" This guilt and self-doubt rippled through the entire school community. Teachers questioned whether they had missed warning signs. Administrators reviewed their supervision and screening procedures. Parents had difficult conversations with their children about trusted adults who might not be trustworthy. The case forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about how predators operate and how institutions can inadvertently enable abuse. Fora hadn't been a suspicious outsider. She had been a valued member of the educational team who had earned trust and respect through years of apparently dedicated service. Community High School District 99 faced intense scrutiny about how Formella had been able to abuse a student for so long without detection. Parents demanded answers about supervision protocols, background screening procedures, and policies regarding teacher-student communications. The district's response revealed systemic vulnerabilities that extended beyond one predatory teacher. Formella had been able to arrange private tutoring sessions with minimal oversight. She had been texting students from her personal phone without administrative knowledge. She had been staying after school with individual students without proper supervision protocols. "The system failed that child," said parent advocate Maria Santos at a heated school board meeting. "We trusted the school to protect our kids, and instead they gave a predator unlimited access to vulnerable students." The district implemented new policies in response to the case. Mandatory supervision for all after-school tutoring, restrictions on teacher-student communications, and enhanced background screening procedures. But many parents felt these measures were too little, too late. The case also sparked broader conversations about how society identifies and responds to female predators. Unlike male predators who are often viewed with immediate suspicion, female predators like Phila can operate for years without detection because they don't fit the stereotypical profile of a sex offender. "We need to acknowledge that predators can be anyone," said Dr. Michael Torres, a child safety expert who spoke at community forums following Formella's arrest. "Gender, profession, and reputation don't protect children from abuse. Only vigilance and proper safeguards do." The community's response also highlighted the importance of believing and supporting victims of abuse. The overwhelming support for Phila's victim and his family sent a clear message that the community would not tolerate the victim-blaming strategies often used by predators and their defenders. But what happened next in the legal proceedings would test that community support and reveal the ongoing challenges of prosecuting female predators. June 16, 2025. One day before facing her expanded charges in court, Christina Formella made a decision that surprised no one who had been following her case. She formally resigned from her teaching position and surrendered her teaching license. Damage to her reputation and career was already irreversible. The legal proceedings revealed the strength of the prosecution's case against Formella. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages documenting the abuse, diary entries revealing her mindset, witness testimony about her behavior, and the victim's detailed account of the systematic abuse he had endured. Prosecutor Jacqueline McAdrew built her case methodically, presenting evidence that showed not just what Formella had done, but how she had planned and concealed her crimes. The prosecution's strategy was to demonstrate that this wasn't a case of poor judgment or an inappropriate relationship. It was systematic child sexual abuse by a calculating predator. The defense faced an almost impossible task. With such overwhelming evidence of guilt, their strategy focused on mitigation rather than denial. They portrayed Formella as someone who had made terrible mistakes, but wasn't the monster the prosecution described. This strategy was undermined by Formella's own words and actions. Her attempts to blame the victim, her lack of genuine remorse, and her continued public displays of defiance made it difficult to portray her as someone deserving of leniency. The case also highlighted disparities in how female predators are prosecuted compared to their male counterparts. While male teachers who abuse students often face swift condemnation and harsh sentences, female predators sometimes benefit from societal assumptions about women and sexuality. However, the Formella case represented a shift in this dynamic. Prosecutors sought the maximum penalty up to 60 years in prison, sending a clear message that gender would not be a mitigating factor in child sexual abuse cases. The law doesn't distinguish between male and female predators. Prosecutor McCant, a child victim deserves justice regardless of their abuser's gender. The case attracted national attention from legal experts who saw it as a potential precedent for how female predators would be prosecuted in the future. The comprehensive charges and aggressive prosecution strategy signaled that the justice system was taking female-perpetrated abuse as seriously as male-perpetrated abuse. But the legal proceedings also revealed the ongoing trauma experienced by the victim and his family. Court appearances, evidence presentations, and media coverage meant that the abuse was being relitigated publicly, forcing the victim to relive his trauma repeatedly. The family's victim impact statements described the ongoing effects of Formella's crimes, therapy costs, academic struggles, trust issues, and the disruption to their entire family dynamic. They asked the court to consider not just the immediate harm caused by the abuse, but the lifelong consequences the victim would face. As the case moved toward resolution, the community watched to see whether the justice system would hold her fully accountable for her crimes or whether her gender and professional status would result in a more lenient outcome. While Christina Formella's case was making its way through the legal system, it was simultaneously exploding across social media platforms in ways that revealed both the power and the problems of viral justice. The case became a phenomenon on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit, generating millions of views, shares, and comments. But unlike previous cases involving female teachers and male students, the online discourse was overwhelmingly focused on the criminal nature of FMLA's actions rather than romanticizing the relationship. TikTok user Abby Blabby became inadvertently central to the case's viral spread when her videos of Formella arriving at court hand-in-hand with her husband generated massive engagement. The footage sparked outrage and disbelief, with viewers expressing shock at Formella's apparent lack of remorse and her husband's continued support. "She's walking into court for child abuse charges like she's going to a movie premiere," commented one viewer. "Where's the shame? Where's the remorse?" The visual of Formella's confident court appearances became a symbol of her perceived arrogance and lack of accountability. Social media users contrasted her demeanor with that of typical defendants facing serious criminal charges, noting her apparent comfort and defiance. Twitter personality Colin Rugg's viral thread about the case garnered hundreds of thousands of engagements, sparking widespread discussion about female perpetrators and sentencing disparities. The thread became a rallying point for those advocating for equal treatment of male and female predators in the justice system. Reddit communities extensively analyzed the case across multiple subreddits, with users dissecting legal strategies, evidence disclosure, and the psychological aspects of female predators. The discussions were notably more sophisticated and less sensationalized than typical social media coverage of criminal cases. Legal analysis threads focused on the potential 60-year maximum sentence, with many users noting that this represented a significant departure from typical sentences in female teacher abuse cases. The comprehensive charges and aggressive prosecution were seen as evidence of changing attitudes toward female predators. The case also generated significant discussion in true crime communities, where content creators analyzed Formella's grooming tactics, psychological profile, and the institutional failures that enabled her abuse. These analyses helped educate audiences about how predators operate and what warning signs to watch for. Major news outlets including NBC Chicago, CBS News, ABC7, Fox News, and the New York Post provided comprehensive coverage, with many highlighting the shocking scope of the charges and the defendants' defiant public appearances. The case maintained sustained coverage across multiple news cycles, from initial arrest through charge escalation. The viral nature of the case served both positive and negative functions. On the positive side, it educated the public about female predators and the serious nature of teacher-student abuse. It also demonstrated that society was no longer willing to romanticize these relationships or excuse female perpetrators. On the negative side, the viral coverage sometimes overshadowed the victim's experience and turned his trauma into entertainment content. The focus on Formella's court appearances and social media presence risked sensationalizing the case rather than focusing on the serious crimes she had committed. The case also highlighted the double-edged nature of social media justice. While the online attention helped ensure the case received proper scrutiny and resources, it also created pressure for quick resolution and harsh punishment that didn't always align with due process principles. But perhaps most importantly, the viral coverage of the FMLA case represented a cultural shift in how society views female predators. The overwhelming condemnation of her actions and the focus on the victim's trauma, rather than the perpetrator's attractiveness or circumstances, suggested that public attitudes toward these cases were evolving in a positive direction. Hit subscribe if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. Women of Crime exposes the truth others won't touch. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Christina Formella case was the role of her husband, Michael, whose unwavering public support for his wife raised uncomfortable questions about complicity, denial, and the psychology of those who stand by predators. Michael Formella married Christina in August 2024 while she was actively abusing her student victim. The wedding photos show a happy couple celebrating their love and commitment to each other. What they don't show is that the bride was simultaneously conducting a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old child. When investigators interviewed Michael after his wife's arrest, he claimed to know nothing about the victim beyond his status as a soccer player. This raises troubling questions. Was Michael truly oblivious to his wife's crimes, or did he choose not to see the signs? The evidence suggests that Christina was remarkably skilled at compartmentalizing her life and deceiving those closest to her. She explained away late nights at school as dedication to helping struggling students. She dismissed text messages from students as part of her job responsibilities. She maintained the facade of a devoted educator and loving wife while systematically abusing a child. But Michael's continued public support for Christina after her arrest and throughout the legal proceedings sparked outrage and disbelief. At every court appearance, he stood by her side, holding her hand and presenting a united front against the charges. This public display of loyalty sent a disturbing message to the community and to other potential victims. It suggested that even when faced with overwhelming evidence of child sexual abuse, some people will prioritize their personal relationships over the protection of children. His support for her is enabling behavior, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in child trauma. It sends the message that maintaining a marriage is more important than acknowledging the harm done to a child victim. The psychology of those who stand by predators is complex and troubling. Some genuinely don't believe the accusations despite evidence. Others acknowledge the crimes but minimize their severity or blame external factors. Still others prioritize their own emotional needs over the welfare of victims. Michael's behavior also highlighted the secondary trauma experienced by families of predators. Learning that someone you love and trust has committed horrific crimes creates its own psychological crisis. Some people respond by seeking truth and accountability. Others respond by denial and defensive loyalty. The public nature of Michael's support for Christina became part of the viral phenomenon surrounding the case. Social media users expressed outrage at his apparent indifference to his wife's crimes and his seeming lack of concern for her victim. Imagine being that child's parents and seeing the predator's husband standing by her side in court, wrote one Twitter user. It's like a second victimization. The case raised broader questions about the responsibilities of those close to predators. Do spouses, family members, and friends have an obligation to report suspicious behavior? How do we balance loyalty to loved ones with protection of potential victims? Legal experts noted that Michael was not charged with any crimes related to his wife's abuse, suggesting that investigators found no evidence of his knowledge or participation. But his public support for Christina continued to generate controversy and discussion about the ethics of standing by someone accused of child sexual abuse. The husband's dilemma in the Fella case became a symbol of how predators' crimes affect entire communities and forced difficult questions about loyalty, accountability, and moral responsibility. Just when you think you've heard the worst about Christina Formella's crimes, the investigation revealed systemic failures that enabled her abuse and put countless other students at risk. The truth investigators uncovered next would shock the entire educational community and force a reckoning with how schools protect or fail to protect vulnerable students from predatory staff members. Community High School District 99 had employed Formella since 2020. For 5 years, she had been working with some of the most vulnerable students in the district, children with learning disabilities who were already struggling academically and socially. These students were perfect targets for a predator because they were desperate for adult approval and less likely to be believed if they reported abuse. The district's background screening procedures had failed to identify any red flags in FMLA's history. She had obtained her teaching license in 2017 and had clean background checks. On paper, she was exactly the kind of educator the district wanted to hire. But the systems designed to monitor and supervise teachers once they were hired had catastrophic gaps that Formella exploited with devastating effectiveness. She was able to arrange private tutoring sessions with minimal oversight. The district's policy required supervision for after-school activities, but this was inconsistently enforced. Formella regularly stayed after school with individual students without proper supervision protocols being followed. She was texting students from her personal phone without administrative knowledge. While the district had policies about teacher-student communications, these were poorly communicated and rarely monitored. Formella was able to maintain extensive text message conversations with her victim for nearly 2 years without detection. She had access to students' personal information and home situations through her role in special education services. This gave her insights into which students were most vulnerable and least likely to report inappropriate behavior. She used this professional knowledge to identify and target her victim. The district's response to the crisis revealed additional problems. Initial statements focused more on protecting the institution's reputation than acknowledging the failures that had enabled the abuse. Parents had to demand transparency and accountability rather than receiving it proactively. They were more concerned about their liability than about the child who was abused, said parent advocate Maria Santos. That tells you everything you need to know about their priorities. The case exposed broader problems in how educational institutions handle predatory behavior. Many districts have policies on paper but lack the training, resources, and commitment necessary to implement them effectively. Staff members may not know how to recognize grooming behavior or may be reluctant to report concerns about colleagues. The special education context made the institutional failures even more egregious. Students with learning disabilities are at higher risk for abuse because they may have difficulty understanding appropriate boundaries, communicating about abuse, or being believed when they report it. Schools have an enhanced responsibility to protect these vulnerable students. Formella's dual role as both teacher and coach created additional opportunities for abuse and additional institutional blind spots. Coaching relationships often involve more physical contact and emotional intimacy than classroom teaching, which can provide cover for inappropriate behavior. The district's supervision of coaching activities was even less rigorous than its classroom oversight. The investigation also revealed that other staff members had noticed FMA's unusual attention to certain students, but had not reported their concerns. This bystander effect is common in institutional abuse cases. People see concerning behavior, but assume someone else will address it or convince themselves that their concerns are unfounded. We train teachers to recognize signs of abuse in students' home lives, but we don't train them to recognize predatory behavior in their colleagues, noted Dr. Patricia Williams, an expert in institutional child protection. That's a dangerous blind spot that predators exploit. The district eventually implemented new policies in response to the Formella case. Mandatory supervision for all after-school activities, restrictions on teacher-student communications, enhanced background screening procedures, and regular training on recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior. But critics argued that these measures were reactive rather than proactive and didn't address the cultural issues that had enabled the abuse in the first place. As the Christina Formella case moved toward resolution, the community watched to see whether the justice system would deliver the accountability that the victim and his family deserved. The comprehensive charges against Formella, 55 felony counts carrying a potential sentence of up to 60 years in prison, represented one of the most aggressive prosecutions of a female predator in recent memory. Prosecutor Jacqueline McAndrew had built an overwhelming case that left little room for doubt about Formella's guilt or the severity of her crimes. The evidence was devastating. Text messages documenting the abuse, diary entries revealing her predatory mindset, witness testimony about her grooming behavior, and the victim's detailed account of systematic sexual assault. The prosecution had methodically demonstrated that this wasn't a case of poor judgment or an inappropriate relationship. It was calculated child sexual abuse by a sophisticated predator. Formella's defense team faced an impossible task. With such overwhelming evidence of guilt, they focused on mitigation rather than denial, attempting to portray their client as someone who had made terrible mistakes but deserved leniency. But this strategy was undermined by Formella's own words and actions throughout the case. Her attempts to blame the victim, her lack of genuine remorse, and her continued public displays of defiance made it difficult to argue for mercy. The diary entries found on her phone in which she blamed the child for ruining her life and marriage revealed a mindset that showed no understanding of the harm she had caused. The victim impact statements filed with the court painted a devastating picture of the long-term consequences of Formella's crimes. The victim struggled with trust issues, academic problems, and trauma symptoms that would likely affect him for years to come. His family described the destruction of their sense of safety and their faith in institutions designed to protect children. "She didn't just abuse my son," the victim's mother wrote. "She stole his innocence, his trust in adults, and his sense of safety in the world. The damage she caused will last a lifetime." The case attracted national attention from legal experts and child protection advocates who saw it as a potential precedent for how female predators would be prosecuted in the future. The comprehensive charges and aggressive prosecution strategy signaled that the justice system was finally taking female-perpetrated abuse as seriously as male-perpetrated abuse. This case sends a clear message that gender is not a mitigating factor in child sexual abuse, said Dr. Michael Torres, a child safety expert. Predators will be held accountable regardless of whether they're male or female. The sentencing phase revealed the true test of whether the justice system would follow through on its promises of equal treatment. Would Formella receive the harsh sentence that the evidence and charges suggested? Or would her gender and professional status result in the kind of leniency that had characterized many previous cases involving female predators? The community waited for justice, knowing that the outcome would send a message about society's commitment to protecting children from all predators, regardless of their gender or position of trust. The Christina Formella case became more than just another criminal prosecution. It became a cultural touchstone that forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about female predators, institutional failures, and the protection of vulnerable children. The case challenged long-held assumptions about women and sexual violence. For decades, society had struggled to acknowledge that women could be sexual predators, often romanticizing relationships between female teachers and male students, or treating them as less serious than male-perpetrated abuse. Formella's case shattered these misconceptions. The evidence revealed a calculating predator who had systematically groomed and abused a vulnerable child while maintaining a facade of professional dedication and personal virtue. There was nothing romantic or sympathetic about her crimes. They were acts of exploitation and abuse that caused lasting trauma to her victim. The viral nature of the case helped educate the public about how female predators operate. Unlike male predators who often use physical force or obvious coercion, female predators typically rely on emotional manipulation and the exploitation of caregiving relationships. They use society's assumptions about women and nurturing to gain access to victims and avoid detection. The case also highlighted the particular vulnerability of students with learning disabilities. These children are often desperate for adult approval and may have difficulty understanding appropriate boundaries or communicating about abuse. Predators like Formella specifically target these vulnerable students because they are less likely to report abuse and less likely to be believed if they do. The institutional failures revealed by the case sparked broader conversations about how schools and other organizations protect children from predatory staff members. The investigation showed that having policies on paper isn't enough. Institutions must have the training, resources, and commitment necessary to implement safeguards effectively. The case influenced policy discussions at the state and national level. Legislators and education officials examined existing laws and regulations to identify gaps that predators might exploit. Some jurisdictions strengthened background screening requirements, enhanced supervision protocols, and improved training for recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior. The legal precedent set by the aggressive prosecution of Formella sent a message to other potential predators that gender would not protect them from accountability. The comprehensive charges and potential 60-year sentence demonstrated that the justice system was finally taking female-perpetrated abuse as seriously as male-perpetrated abuse. The case also had a broader cultural impact on how society discusses and understands sexual abuse. The overwhelming condemnation of Formella's actions and the focus on her victim's trauma rather than her personal circumstances represented a positive shift in public attitudes toward these cases. Social media played a crucial role in this cultural shift. The viral coverage of the case helped ensure that it received proper attention and resources while also educating the public about the serious nature of teacher-student abuse. The online discourse was notably more sophisticated and less sensationalized than typical coverage of similar cases. The case became a reference point for other prosecutions involving female predators. Legal experts and advocates pointed to the FMLA case as an example of how these crimes should be investigated, prosecuted, and punished. It set a new standard for accountability that other jurisdictions began to follow. But perhaps most importantly, the case gave voice to victims of female-perpetrated abuse who had previously been ignored or dismissed. The serious treatment of Forella's crimes and the recognition of her victims' trauma sent a message that all abuse victims deserve justice regardless of their abuser's gender. The Christina Formella case forced a reckoning with how society identifies, prevents, and responds to predatory behavior in educational settings. The lessons learned from this devastating case have implications that extend far beyond one Illinois school district. The first and most important lesson is that predators can be anyone. Formella didn't fit the stereotypical profile of a sex offender. She was young, attractive, professionally successful, and apparently devoted to her students. She had clean background checks, positive evaluations, and the trust of parents and colleagues. These characteristics didn't protect children from her abuse. They enabled it. This reality requires a fundamental shift in how institutions approach child protection. Instead of relying on stereotypes and assumptions about who might be dangerous, organizations must implement comprehensive safeguards that assume anyone could potentially pose a risk to children. The case also demonstrated the importance of proper supervision and oversight. Formella was able to abuse her victim for nearly 2 years because she had unsupervised access to him through after-school tutoring and coaching activities. The district's policies required supervision, but these requirements were inconsistently enforced. Effective child protection requires more than policies on paper. It requires systematic implementation, regular monitoring, and accountability for compliance. Organizations must create cultures where child safety is prioritized over convenience, tradition, or individual preferences. The grooming process revealed by the case highlighted the need for better education about how predators operate. Formella used classic grooming techniques, identifying a vulnerable target, building trust and emotional dependence. gradually breaking down boundaries and isolating the victim from potential support systems. Educators, parents, and children themselves need to understand these warning signs so they can recognize and report concerning behavior before it escalates to abuse. This education must be age-appropriate and culturally sensitive, but it must also be comprehensive and honest about the realities of predatory behavior. The case underscored the particular vulnerability of students with learning disabilities and other special needs. These children are at higher risk for abuse because they may have difficulty understanding appropriate boundaries, communicating about abuse, or being believed when they report it. Schools have an enhanced responsibility to protect these vulnerable students through additional safeguards and specialized training. The institutional response to the case revealed the importance of transparency and accountability when abuse occurs. The district's initial focus on protecting its reputation rather than acknowledging failures damaged community trust and hindered the healing process. Organizations must be prepared to take responsibility for systemic failures and implement meaningful reforms. The role of bystanders in preventing abuse also became clear through the investigation. Several staff members had noticed Formella's unusual attention to certain students, but had not reported their concerns. Creating cultures where people feel empowered and obligated to report suspicious behavior is crucial for child protection. The case highlighted the need for better support systems for abuse victims and their families. The trauma caused by Formella's crimes extended far beyond the immediate victim to include his family, classmates, and the broader school community. Institutions must be prepared to provide comprehensive support services when abuse occurs. The legal precedent set by the aggressive prosecution of Formella demonstrated the importance of taking all abuse seriously, regardless of the perpetrator's gender or status. The comprehensive charges and potential harsh sentence sent a clear message that child sexual abuse will not be tolerated or excused. The viral nature of the case showed both the power and the problems of social media in addressing abuse cases. While online attention helped ensure the case received proper resources and public scrutiny, it also risked sensationalizing the victim's trauma and turning his suffering into entertainment content. Moving forward, the lessons from the Formella case must be applied systematically across educational institutions and other organizations that serve children. This includes implementing comprehensive background screening and ongoing monitoring procedures, creating robust supervision protocols for all adult-child interactions, providing regular training on recognizing and reporting predatory behavior, establishing clear policies for adult-child communications and relationships, creating cultures that prioritize child safety over institutional reputation, supporting victims and families when abuse occurs, holding predators accountable regardless of their gender or status. The story of Christina Formella proves that evil doesn't discriminate by gender. Subscribe to Women of Crime and share this video. Everyone needs to understand that monsters can look like anyone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What warning signs would you watch for after hearing this? The case serves as a stark reminder that protecting children requires constant vigilance, comprehensive safeguards, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. The price of complacency is measured in destroyed lives and shattered trust. Christina Formella's crimes cannot be undone, but the lessons learned from her case can help prevent future tragedies. The question is whether society will have the wisdom and commitment to apply these lessons before more children are harmed by predators hiding in plain sight. The fight to protect children from predators like Christina Formella continues. The victims deserve nothing less than our complete commitment to creating a world where no child suffers the trauma that her victim endured. That commitment must be reflected in our policies, our practices, and our willingness to confront the uncomfortable reality that monsters can wear the faces of those we trust.